I think we've all had the experience where you're driving down the highway and you're trying to get into a different lane and the person won't let you into the lane, right? And you just wait and then the person passes and then you try to get into the lane again and the next person won't let you in. And that's just a kind of experience that everyone has. It's a common everyday experience. At the same time, I go to a gym, and at this gym that I go to, whenever I go there, there's always someone, whenever someone's ahead of you, they always hold the door for you. And so the natural thing is that when I have the door, I hold the door for the next person, and it goes on and on. So we see these two real tendencies in human nature, right? One is a tendency towards selfishness, towards saying me first, right? It's all about getting my way, and it's my way and not another person's way. Other people are obstacles that I have to overcome in order to get what I want, right? But there's another aspect of human nature, which is also grounded in human nature, which is cooperation, right? Where we seek to work together, where we see our interests as deeply enmeshed with other people's interests. And when other people are doing well, we feel that we're doing well. And we open in generosity and care and compassion to other people. And so, both these elements are linked to our survival, both the selfish element as well as this expansive and connected element. And I would call these two different mindsets, really, a contracted mindset on the one hand, where you see yourself as very small and atomized and opposed to others, versus an expansive mindset. Now, Jewish tradition recognizes this, and they actually recognize these two mindsets, and they give different terms to this. They call it, on the one hand, they call the contracted mindset the evil inclination, and they call the expansive mindset the good inclination. And so when we're coming to the question of, well, what is the source of evil, right? At some level, this is part of the answer. Right? When we're very selfish, when we're very concerned just about ourselves, right? When we see it, if someone else gets something, that's taking it from me. I have to get it from the other person before they take it from me. When we see life as a zero-sum game, that causes a lot of violence. That causes a lot of disruption between people. While when we're generous and connected, that is a kind of condition for peace. But I think actually, there are certain situations where there's kind of war of all against all, where you're just everyone's going for the same thing, and there's kind of chaos. And that happens, and that's a kind of source of evil. But there's also, I think the deeper source is actually when these two get connected, right? And when on the one hand, you feel connected to other people, you feel a sense of affiliation with other people, but you form a group, and that group is opposed to other groups. Right? And it's a kind of death struggle between the two groups, right? And the good for your group depends on the other group failing. And the other group thinks that their goodness depends on you failing. So it's almost like a social Darwinism, right? And I think that's a kind of a really much more profound and much more troubling source of evil. So what's the attraction to these two different modes of being, right? The contracted mindset and the expansive mindset. Well, one thing that's attractive about the contracted mindset is that we feel powerful. When we're angry, when we feel hate, we get a jolt of energy. We feel like alive, right? Some people are enjoying their anger in the sense that they feel like energized by it, right? But in a really deeper sense, the true power really comes from being able to connect, right? And that's what's kind of helped us as a species. That's what's really allowed us to really flourish as a species, and is this ability to connect and see our interests as entwined with other people. Now, one of my favorite philosophers and Jewish philosophers in the Jewish tradition is Moses Mendelssohn. And he was someone who lived in the Enlightenment in the 18th century, and he faced a lot of discrimination, and there was a lot of hatred towards him. But he recognized this point that the greatest power is in reconciliation. He commented on the story of God's revelation to Moses in Exodus 34. Moses asked God to show me your face, and God reveals his face. And what is it? God reveals his mercy, 13 attributes of mercy, That's God's greatest power, not the fear, not the terror, the mercy. And Moses Mendelssohn says, it requires some reflection if we are to comprehend that hatred and vindictiveness, envy and cruelty are at bottom nothing but weakness and merely the effects of fear. Fear combined with accidental, uncertain superiority is the mother of these barbaric sentiments. Fear alone renders us cruel and implacable. He who is conscious with certainty of his superiority finds far much greater felicity in indulgence and pardon. So when we feel secure, we feel much more prone to conciliation. It's when we're fearful and we feel weak that we lash out and we focus on me, my. So I just want to end by thinking about how do we get to move from a contracted to more an expansive mindset. And on the one hand, the very common answer is you have to supply people with material goods, right? If people don't have enough to eat, if they don't have safety, right? They're naturally going to become selfish. They're naturally going to be fearful. They're naturally just going to think about themselves. Well, if they have a lot, if they have abundance, then they could be more open and generous. And there's clearly truth to that. But at the same time, there's many people who are very wealthy who are very selfish and who do some really terrible things. And you have people who are poor and don't have a lot and really open their hearts. So what I'd kind of like to conclude here is that in addition to the material elements of things, the way we come to these different mindsets, contracted versus expansive, has to do with modeling, right? We're naturally imitative beings. We imitate what people do around us, right? If we see people acting selfish, we say, oh, that's the game. The game is selfishness, so let me just get mine. If we see people acting generous, if we see people acting open-hearted, then that rubs off on other people. We say, oh, we switch to the other mindset and we say, okay, this is a context where I'm open-hearted, where I'm connected. So I think in this world, it can seem like a very scary world where it seems like we have so little power. There's forces, government forces, political forces that are so beyond us that we can't really make any impact. But I would really urge you to consider that all of your actions, whatever you do in the world, if you're generous and open-hearted, that's having an impact on people. And you really have the ability to impact people in little ways and to really kind of change and flip how other people will act. And it will ripple out for a good effect.
So in some ways, my comments are going to be, and we didn't plan it that way, but this is how how it's turning out. My comments are going to be a long footnote on a small comment by Mendelssohn about superiority that has been made, and kind of significance of what we'd often don't recognize as a source of ill, and indeed we often think of it as a source of good, especially kind of cultural and public good. We think that striving for superiority, and by striving for superiority, I mean striving to be better than somebody else, not striving to be better. I would call that striving for excellence, and I would want to categorically distinguish between these two. But striving for superiority, I want to highlight the degree to which this is a kind of a problematic sentiment, and its problematic nature kind of spans from relatively innocent kinds of competitions that occur and senses of inferiority that it leaves us with, to being utterly devastating for the relationship, for the economic life, for political life, and so on. That has been recognized over the centuries. I was doing a little bit of research on that in Rousseau in his Second Discourse. That's a very important kind of problem, and at the origin of sources of inequality. The same is true also of Theory of Moral Sentiments by Adam Smith. But what I like to do is I like to kind of give you a few thoughts based on John Milton's Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost, I hope you have read Paradise Lost. It's not easy reading, but it's a fantastically rewarding text. And talking about politics, this whole Paradise Lost, you can read it as a political tract. His anti-monarchical kind of a stance. But central to the whole story is actually relationship between God and Satan. At least that's how I read that text. Not everybody does. And very early on, actually not very early on in the text, but in the story, very early on, you come to what has been known in Milton studies, Satan's soliloquy. He's talking to himself, and he's right now standing before the entrance into the paradise with a goal to spoil that new creation of God. Those of you who read Paradise Lost will know. And as he's standing there looking the new earth that God has created, and Milton says, with all the delights around him, he was undelighted. And that already indicates to you what happens with the striving for superiority. You cannot delight in the delight if the delight is not indexed positively to your superiority. If it's indexed to somebody else's superiority, suddenly what is a source of delight ends up being a source of envy, in fact, right? So, when he's in this situation, Satan, he then starts thinking about what has brought him there to wage the war against God, to involve this insane insurrection, and then he thinks about he was in a position next to God in the hierarchy of heaven. And then there was a longing that has gripped him, and Milton wisely does not tell us why this longing was there, suggesting in some ways that the kind of the problem of the emergence of evil. We can see the mechanism that pushed you there, but why you make the decision that you make remains hidden in mystery. I personally think, people would disagree with that in terms of our life in the world, we are faced with two great mysteries. One is the mystery of love, and the other one is the mystery of evil. And both of these mysteries are not quite accessible to explanation, to reason, of reason. And in some ways, for us to recognize them as what we intuitively think they are, they need to remain shrouded in mystery. That may be also the question that we might discuss. Is there something like mystery of evil, or is it kind of rationally discernible and identifiable what is the source of evil? But it's no accident that it's the second in line that is experiencing this sense of needing to be the second. The worst thing is, right, in Olympic Games, when you have people getting medals, second place is terrible. Right? They didn't make the first, right? The third place is great. Oh, I'm standing on the podium, but second place is often a very difficult spot to be. That's where Satan is, second place. And there is a sense of inferiority that causes him to go into the rebellion mode. And suddenly this inability to live it himself. He wants to make one step that will make him highest, the jump over God into the highest position, which in and of itself is a kind of desire that he knows is unbounded and unreasonable. And nonetheless, that sense of self-loathing in comparison with others drives him, and he cannot free himself from it. Interesting thing to read is kind of the pain of Satan at not being able to free himself of it. And that's also an indicator I think to me about the character of evil. Often we think the evildoers are they just do it because they do it as a kind of high action of the will, and fail to see the captivity that lies behind that, a captivity to the power of evil. And of course, when Satan cannot help himself, he wages war against God. He knows it's completely futile. He develops the whole theology and ontology of how he came to be, so that he wouldn't be dependent on God. So you have evil creating ideologies for itself in which it can live relatively comfortably and masking, in fact, who the person is, so as to be able to live a life as they wish to live. And if you look at the temptation that he then exposes Adam and Eve in Milton's reading of this, he basically wants to create Eve in his own image, because that's going to spoil the new creation that God has made. So my sense is that in our lives, often kind of this striving for superiority, the problem of evil often lies in this striving for superiority. And I will end with its relationship to friendship. And this is a story from the Bible. Some of you will be familiar. I'm going to exposit it, notwithstanding it's from the Hebrew Bible. I'm going to briefly exposit it, and then Micah will correct me. And that's, as you can anticipate, story of Cain and Abel, which I read as a story. You can read it various ways, obviously, which I read as a story of the problematic nature of wanting, not striving to become superior, but by all means wanting to protect one's own superiority. Cain is the firstborn. Already it's signaled kind of certain kind of importance, and then Eve gives him that name, which means, with the help of God, I have given birth to a human child. Right. So this a proud mother is elevating her own son. Second is born, which is Abel, and Abel means kind of vapor, kind of vanity, almost like nothingness. And so you have already in the two names a kind of profound difference inscribed, and Cain takes over what has been projected unto him as a firstborn, and sees himself as important, and Abel, he's nothing, not nothing in absolute sense, but nothing in comparison with, which is fundamental in this. And then they both offer a sacrifice to God, and then miracle of miracle happens that crosses the entire world of Cain. Namely, God looks with favor on Abel's sacrifice, but not on Cain's. Now we can guess why. We can try to guess why that happened, but for a moment we can leave it as it is. The sheer fact of a sacrifice being recognized of Abel by the highest authority, no less, right, was enough to place Cain in the position of rage, and therefore to motivate the first murder that one has recorded in the Bible. Again, now striving not to become superior, but striving to retain the status of superiority creates, is at the core of the evil that's being perpetrated between two who are brothers, two who are in fact friends. And maybe in this dynamic there's also a little bit of hope, that is to say, of possibility of ways in which we can cross the push toward superiority. And maybe we can talk about that if you are interested in the remainder of this evening.